My name is Eli Navarro, 39 years old, and I'm sitting here in a sterile law office that smells of old coffee and disappointment, listening to words that will change everything. The lawyer's voice drones on like the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, but all I can focus on is the way my hands shake slightly as I grip the edge of the mahogany table. Outside the window, Seattle's waterfront stretches gray and endless, cargo ships sitting like sleeping giants in the harbor, and I wonder if my mother Rosa ever looked out at this same view and imagined what would happen after she was gone. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The reading of her will feels surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold in slow motion. Lena sits beside me, my younger sister with her perfectly styled hair and designer suit that probably costs more than I make in 2 months as a bookkeeper. She's always been the successful one, the one who inherited Mom's business sense and fearless ambition, while I inherited her quiet eyes and tendency to fade into corners during family gatherings. Even now, she radiates that effortless confidence that makes people lean in when she speaks, while I shrink back into my second-hand blazer that suddenly feels too tight around the shoulders. To my daughter Lena, the lawyer continues, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, I leave my trust fund in the amount of $2.3 million. Lena nods as if she expected this. And maybe she did. She's always been Mom's natural successor, the one who understood profit margins and market trends, who could walk into a room full of strangers and emerge with 3 new business contacts and a dinner invitation. But then comes the part that makes my stomach drop like a stone into dark water. To my son Eli, I leave the Navarro Maritime Company in its entirety, including all assets, properties, records, and responsibilities. The words hang in the air, like smoke from an extinguished candle. I feel everyone's eyes on me, and I want to disappear, to sink through the floor and emerge somewhere safe and predictable, where the biggest decision I have to make is whether to use blue ink or black in my ledger books. Lena reaches over and squeezes my shoulder, her touch gentle but somehow patronizing. Mom always said you had hidden depths, Eli, she says with that smile that's meant to be encouraging but feels like pity. Though honestly, I think she was just trying to find a way to make sure you had something substantial. She pauses, glancing at the man in the expensive suit who's been sitting quietly in the corner like a patient vulture. Victor Crane from Pacific Northwest Logistics has been very interested in acquiring waterfront properties. Maybe we should at least hear what he has to say. Crane stands with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to making deals, his handshake firm and his smile practiced. Mr. Navarro, I'm sorry for your loss. Your mother was quite the businesswoman in her day. His words carry the subtle implication that her day has long since passed. I'd be very interested in discussing the future of your company. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for a struggling business is to let it find new life under fresh management. I nod because I don't know what else to do, because the weight of inheriting something I never wanted feels like wearing clothes that belong to someone else. But deep in my chest, something stirs. Maybe curiosity, maybe stubbornness. I'd like to see the company first, I hear myself say, surprising everyone, including me, before I make any decisions. 3 days later, I find myself standing at the rusted gates of what used to be my mother's empire, and the word empire feels like a cruel joke as I stare at the peeling paint and broken windows of the Navarro Maritime Company. The salt air cuts through my jacket like cold fingers, carrying with it the smell of low tide and something else, something that might be decay, or might just be the weight of years pressing down on everything here like a heavy blanket. The warehouse looms before me, its corrugated metal siding streaked with rust stains that look like tears running down weathered cheeks, and I wonder how many times my mother stood in this exact spot, seeing possibility where I see only problems. Inside, the fluorescent lights flicker with the irregular rhythm of a dying heartbeat, casting sickly shadows across mountains of unfiled paperwork that seem to reproduce when nobody's looking. Bills stamped in red ink pile on every available surface, and I can practically hear the creditors circling like sharks in deep water. The workers, what few remain, glance at me with expressions that range from curious to suspicious, their faces weathered by decades of harbor winds, and the kind of hard work that leaves permanent creases around the eyes. They know who I am, but they don't know me, and I can feel their silent judgment settling on my shoulders like dust. "You must be Rosa's boy." The voice comes from behind me, gravelly and warm like whiskey left too long in the sun. I turn to see a man in his 70s, built like a dock piling, solid, weathered, unmovable. His hands are the size of dinner plates, scarred from years of rope burn and metal splinters, and his eyes hold the kind of steady gaze that's seen storms come and go without flinching. "Mateo Santos. Worked these docks for 43 years, most of them for your mother." He extends one of those massive hands, and when I shake it, I feel like I'm being measured for something I don't understand yet. "She said you might come by eventually," he continues, studying my face with the intensity of someone reading a map. "Said I should tell you things when you were ready to hear them." He pauses, scratching his gray stubble with a sound like sandpaper on wood. Though I'm not sure anybody's ever really ready. "What kind of things?" I ask, though part of me already knows I'm opening a door I might not be able to close again. Around us, the warehouse creaks and settles like an old ship riding swells, and I notice for the first time that some of the workers have stopped what they're doing to listen, their attention focused on us with an intensity that makes my skin prickle. Mateo's smile is enigmatic, revealing teeth stained by decades of coffee and cigarettes. "Your mother, she wasn't just a shipping magnate's son. She was—" He trails off, glancing around at the listening ears, then leans closer until I can smell the salt and motor oil that seems permanently embedded in his clothes. "She was someone who understood that some cargo is more precious than gold." His eyes drift toward the back of the warehouse, where I notice a door marked "Records, Authorized Personnel Only," its surface scarred by time and neglect. "When you're ready to learn what kind of business your mother really ran, you let me know." I return to the warehouse after midnight when the world feels hollow and my footsteps echo like gunshots against the concrete floor, the keys to the records room heavy in my pocket like secrets waiting to be born. The building breathes around me with the rhythm of settling metal and creaking wood, and through the salt-stained windows I can see the harbor lights reflecting on black water like scattered stars fallen from grace. My flashlight cuts through the darkness in weak yellow beams, illuminating dust motes that dance like ghosts in the stale air, and I wonder what my mother would think of me now, her careful bookkeeper's son about to unlock doors she kept sealed for reasons I'm only beginning to understand. The records room smells of old paper and something else, something that might be fear or might be hope, I can't tell which. Boxes line the shelves like sleeping soldiers, each one marked with codes that mean nothing to me. ML73A, SR78B, RF81C. My hands shake as I pull down the first box, and inside I find photographs that make my breath catch in my throat like a fishhook snagging flesh. My mother, young and fierce-eyed, standing beside people whose faces are deliberately blurred or turned away from the camera, their bodies tense with the kind of alertness that comes from living on the edge of danger. Letters tied with faded ribbon spill across the dusty floor when I lift them from their hiding place, written in Spanish and Tagalog with words I can't read but somehow feel in my bones. Some bear official seals from the Philippine government, their wax cracked and brittle like dried blood, while others are handwritten on paper so thin it feels like tissue between my fingers. The dates range from 1972 to 1986, years when I was learning to tie my shoes and reading picture books, while my mother was apparently living a life I never imagined possible. Soul. But it's the ledgers that stop my heart completely, thick books bound in cracked leather with entries that don't match anything I know about shipping cargo. Instead of grain shipments and textile deliveries, I find entries like 15 passengers, Mindanao to Seattle, medical supplies needed, and family of 6, urgent departure required, fishing boat disguised as cargo vessel. The numbers don't add up to profit margins, they add up to human lives, to people whose names are carefully recorded alongside departure dates and arrival confirmations. At the bottom of the largest crate, beneath layers of manifests and customs documents, my fingers find a false bottom that gives way, with the soft whisper of hidden things finally seeing light. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth like sacred relics, are bundles of letters tied with string and a small notebook filled with my mother's careful handwriting. The first page reads, "For Eli, when he's ready to understand that some inheritances are heavier than gold and more precious than safety." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I sit there on the cold floor surrounded by the debris of my mother's secret life, understanding finally that she didn't leave me a failing business. She left me a mission that's been waiting 30 years for someone brave enough to carry it forward. The next morning I find myself sitting across from Matteo in a diner that looks like it hasn't changed since the Carter administration, its red vinyl booths cracked and patched with electrical tape, the kind of place where the coffee is strong enough to wake the dead, and the waitresses call everyone honey, whether they know you or not. Through the salt-stained windows I can see the harbor stretching out like a gray promise, cargo ships moving with the slow deliberation of sleeping giants, and I wonder how many secrets have crossed these waters while the rest of the world went about its ordinary business of buying groceries and complaining about the weather. Matteo studies me over his steaming mug like he's trying to read tea leaves in my expression, his weathered hands wrapped around the ceramic with the careful precision of someone who's spent decades handling things that could break if you're not gentle enough. "You found the room," he says, and it's not a question, because he can see the truth written across my face like newspaper headlines. "Found the photographs, the letters, the ledgers, that don't make sense unless you know what to look for." I nod because words feel inadequate for the earthquake that's been rattling around inside my chest since last night, for the way everything I thought I knew about my mother has been turned inside out, like an old coat, revealing hidden pockets full of secrets. "She was smuggling people," I say, and even hearing myself speak the words aloud feels like stepping off a cliff into empty air. During martial law in the Philippines, she was using the shipping routes to get people out. "Smuggling's an ugly word for what she did," Matteo says, his voice carrying the weight of someone who's been carrying these stories for decades like stones in his pockets. "What she did was save lives when the government was disappearing people like morning mist. I remember one night in '78, we had a fishing boat come in disguised as a cargo delivery, packed with a family whose father had been teaching at the university. Wrong kind of books, wrong kind of ideas, you understand." He pauses to take a long sip of coffee, his eyes distant with memory. 3 kids. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5, all of them scared out of their minds but trying to be brave because their parents told them they were going on an adventure. The waitress refills our cups without being asked, her movements automatic and practiced, and I find myself wondering if she knows she's serving coffee to a man whose worldview is being rebuilt one story at a time. "Your mother, she didn't just arrange the transport," Matteo continues, leaning forward until I can see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "She found them jobs, housing, helped the kids get into school. That family, they run a restaurant in Beacon Hill now, still send your mother Christmas cards every year." His expression grows serious, lines deepening around his eyes like cracks in old leather. "But digging into this, son, it's going to stir up the wrong kind of interest. There are people who'd rather let sleeping dogs lie, if you catch my meaning." "What people?" I ask, though part of me already knows I don't want the answer. I'm sitting in the warehouse office 3 days later, surrounded by ledgers and manifests that read like poetry, written in a language I'm only beginning to understand, when she walks through the door like purpose given human form. Mara Villanueva moves with the confident stride of someone who's spent years chasing stories through crowded newsrooms and hostile interview subjects, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and her eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that misses nothing and forgets less. She's maybe 32, 33, with hands that gesture when she talks, and a voice that carries the slight accent of someone who learned English as a second language but mastered it better than most native speakers ever will. "Mr. Navarro," she says, extending a hand that's firm and warm and somehow familiar, though I know we've never met before this moment. "My name is Mara Villanueva. I'm a journalist with the Seattle Weekly, and I think your mother saved my grandparents' lives." The words hang in the dusty air between us, like a bridge I'm not sure I'm ready to cross, and I find myself staring at her face, searching for something I can't name. Maybe proof, maybe absolution, maybe just the confirmation that I'm not losing my mind in this maze of secrets and revelations. She reaches into her leather satchel with the practiced efficiency of someone who's learned to carry her life in portable pieces, pulling out a manila folder that she places on the desk between us like an offering. These are copies of documents my family kept, letters and photographs from the crossing in 1979. Her fingers, I notice, are stained with ink like mine often are, the mark of someone who still believes in the power of words written on paper. My grandmother always said there was an angel in Seattle who helped people disappear when they needed to vanish, someone who could make fishing boats into passenger ships and shipping manifests into prayers. The photograph she slides across the desk makes my breath catch in my throat like a fishhook finding flesh. It's my mother, younger than I ever remember seeing her, standing beside an elderly Filipino couple on what looks like a dock at dawn. The woman in the photo is holding a small suitcase and a child's stuffed rabbit, her face turned slightly away from the camera, with the careful caution of someone who's learned that being seen can be dangerous. But it's the expression in my mother's eyes that stops my heart, fierce and protective and absolutely certain of what she's doing. "That's my grandmother, Carmen Villanueva," Mara says, her voice softer now, touched with the kind of reverence people reserve for speaking about saints and miracles. "She died 2 years ago, but she never stopped talking about the woman who gave her family a second chance at life." She leans forward, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that makes me want to look away, but won't let me. "Mr. Navarro, I think there are still people missing, families who never made it across, and I believe the answers are somewhere in your mother's records." Lena storms into the warehouse like a hurricane given human form, her heels clicking against the concrete floor with the staccato rhythm of machine gun fire, and I can tell from the set of her shoulders and the way her designer handbag swings at her side that someone has been talking to her about my recent activities. She's dressed for battle in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people make in a month, her hair swept back in the kind of severe bun that makes her look like she could negotiate hostile takeovers before breakfast and still have time to crush someone's dreams over coffee. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Eli?" she demands, her voice cutting through the warehouse air like a blade through silk, and I notice that the few remaining workers have suddenly found urgent tasks in distant corners of the building. "I heard you've been meeting with journalists, digging through Mom's old files like some kind of amateur detective. Victor Crane called me this morning, asking if you'd lost your mind." I look up from the ledger I've been studying, a manifest from 1981 that lists cargo as medical supplies and educational materials, but whose coded notations suggest something entirely different, and I feel something stirring in my chest that might be anger or might be courage. I can't tell the difference anymore. "Maybe I'm finally finding it," I say, and the words surprise me with their steadiness, with the way they don't waver or apologize for taking up space in the air between us. "Finding what?" Lena snaps, her eyes flashing with the kind of impatience she's always had for what she considers my overthinking, my tendency to see complications where she sees simple solutions. Some romantic fantasy about Mom being some kind of hero. She ran a shipping company, Eli, not a charity for lost causes. She gestures around the warehouse with the dismissive sweep of someone who sees only rust and decay where others might see history. "Look at this place. Look at the debt. Look at the reality of what she left behind." "She saved people," I say, standing up, because suddenly sitting feels like surrender, like admitting defeat before the battle has even begun. "During martial law in the Philippines, she used her ships to smuggle families to safety. There are people alive today because of what she did." My voice grows stronger with each word, fueled by something I didn't know I possessed. Maybe it's Rosa's courage. Maybe it's just exhaustion with being the quiet one, the one who never makes waves. Lena's laugh is sharp and bitter, like broken glass in morning coffee. "And while she was playing savior, she was bleeding money and accumulating debt that we're stuck with now." She steps closer, her voice dropping to the tone she uses when she wants to sound reasonable while delivering ultimatums. "I've been talking to Victor, Eli. He's prepared to offer us $5 million for the property and the company name. That's enough to pay off all the debts and leave us both comfortable." She pauses, studying my face like she's reading a map to my weaknesses. But his patience isn't infinite. He needs an answer by the end of the month. Over the next week, Mara and I work through the archives, like archaeologists excavating a lost civilization, surrounded by towers of documents that smell of salt air and secrets kept too long in darkness. She brings coffee in thermos bottles and sandwiches wrapped in brown paper, settling into the work with the kind of focused intensity that makes hours disappear like water through cupped hands. I watch her decode my mother's careful handwriting, cross-referencing names and dates with the patient dedication of someone who understands that every notation might represent a life saved or lost, and I find myself thinking that Rosa would have liked this fierce young woman who refuses to let the past stay buried. "Look at this," Mara says on Thursday evening, her finger tracing a line in a ledger from December 1983. "Your mother logged a pickup that was never completed. The Esperanza family, scheduled to depart from Zambales province, but the notation says, 'Abort mission, surveillance detected.'" She looks up at me with eyes that hold the weight of understanding what those clinical words really mean. "There were children, Eli. 2 daughters, ages 8 and 12. The family just vanished from the records after that." I lean over her shoulder to study the entry, breathing in the faint scent of her shampoo mixed with the dusty smell of old paper, and I feel something cold settle in my stomach like a stone dropped into deep water. "You think they're still out there somewhere?" I ask, though I'm not sure I want to hear the answer, because it would mean that Rosa's work isn't finished, that this inheritance comes with obligations that stretch beyond death into the realm of the living. "I think your mother never stopped looking for them," Mara replies, flipping to a section of newer entries, notes written in Rosa's increasingly shaky handwriting from her final years. These are from 2019-2020. She was still tracking missing families, still trying to connect people with relatives who made it to safety. Her voice carries the kind of reverence people reserve for speaking about saints and miracles. She turned this into a lifelong mission. But our quiet investigation has drawn attention we didn't want and can't ignore. Tuesday morning, I arrive at the warehouse to find muddy footprints that aren't mine or Mara's, leading directly to the records room like breadcrumbs marking a trail we never meant to leave. The lock has scratches around the keyhole, fresh metal shavings that catch the fluorescent light like evidence of violation, and I know with the certainty of prey animals that we're being watched by something predatory and patient. When I call Mateo, his voice carries the weight of old fears proved justified. "I told you, son," he says, and I can hear him lighting a cigarette with the practiced motion of someone who's been smoking through stress for decades. "Some people got rich during martial law, made their fortunes by looking the other way or pointing fingers in the right directions. Your mother's records, they're not just about who she saved, they're about who helped her, who turned a blind eye, who might have blood on their hands they'd rather keep clean." But it's the phone call to Mara that breaks something fundamental inside my chest, her voice shaking with an anger I've never heard before as she tells me about the anonymous caller who knew her address, her routine, the coffee shop where she works most mornings. "They told me that some stories are better left buried," she says, and I can hear the fear underneath her fury, the understanding that we've crossed a line from which there might be no safe return. They said journalists who dig too deep sometimes find themselves in holes they can't climb out of. That night, I gather everyone who matters in the warehouse office, Mateo with his weathered hands and eyes that have seen storms come and go, Mara with her laptop and her stubborn refusal to be intimidated, the handful of dock workers who remember Rosa's kindness and understand that some things are worth fighting for even when the odds are stacked against you. I look at their faces in the fluorescent light that flickers like a dying heartbeat, and I think about my mother standing in this same space decades ago, making decisions that would echo through generations of lives she'd never meet. "They want us to disappear quietly," I say, my voice carrying a strength I didn't know I possessed until this moment when everything depends on finding it. They want us to take the money and pretend that what Rosa did doesn't matter, that the people she saved were just cargo in a ledger book. I pause, looking around the room at faces that reflect my own determination back at me like mirrors. But we're not going to disappear. We're going to digitize every document, copy every photograph, and make sure these stories survive, even if the building doesn't. Mateo's smile is fierce and proud, like an old warrior recognizing courage in a young recruit. "Your mother would be proud, son," he says, and those words settle in my chest like warm stones stacked against the cold. 6 months later, I stand in the transformed warehouse watching families gather for the opening ceremony of the Rosa Navarro Maritime Heritage and Humanitarian Center, and the air that once smelled of rust and decay now carries the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings, mixed with the salt breeze that will always be part of this place's soul. The legal battle was bruising and expensive, fought in courtrooms that smelled of old wood and broken dreams, but when the judge declared the archives culturally and historically significant, when she ruled that they deserved protection as a public trust rather than private profit, I felt my mother's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder telling me I'd finally found my way home. Victor Crane disappeared after the ruling like morning mist touched by sunlight, his threats and ultimatums evaporating in the face of federal preservation orders and media attention that painted him as the villain he'd always been, but hidden behind expensive suits and charitable donations. Lena took her trust fund and moved to Portland, our last conversation brief and bitter as winter coffee, her final words something about me choosing strangers over family. But I think she never understood that Rosa's work made strangers into family in ways that shared blood alone never could. Cincinalati's final. The exhibit hall displays the photographs and letters we rescued from decades of hiding, each story carefully preserved behind climate-controlled glass, like sacred relics that speak of courage in the face of impossible odds. Mara stands beside the centerpiece display, a recreation of Rosa's office complete with the ledgers that once seemed like meaningless numbers, but now read like poetry, written in the language of hope and human dignity. She's wearing a simple blue dress that brings out the warmth in her eyes, and when she smiles at me across the room, I feel something settle in my chest that might be peace, or might be the beginning of understanding what home really means. The Esperanza family exhibit will open next month, she tells the gathered crowd, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who's learned that the most important stories are often the ones that take longest to tell. Thanks to tips from community members, we've located Maria Esperanza Santos in Vancouver, and she'll be traveling here to share her family's story and help us continue searching for the relatives who were separated during the crossing attempts. As the afternoon fades into evening and the last visitors drift toward the exit, I find myself alone on the dock, where my mother once stood making decisions that would ripple through decades of lives she'd never meet. A cargo ship moves slowly across Elliott Bay, its lights reflecting on dark water like scattered stars, and I imagine Rosa at the helm of something similar, carrying precious cargo toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The company will never make me rich, but it's making me something better. The kind of man who understands that some inheritances can't be measured in dollars and cents, only in the lives they touch and the courage they inspire long after their creators have gone to rest. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.